I think as artists, we tend to think of money as an entirely separate realm to art. But if you think about it, it's just as important as any other factor. Just as companies will behave differently if they're public and beholden to stockholders rather than private, the means of funding is going to change the outcome of the art. And so specifically in the realm of documentaries, let's look at a couple different ways of funding them. There's 4 broad categories. The first one that probably comes to people's mind is getting funded by these big broadcasting and streaming platforms. They either commission a documentary outright, like how Netflix made the Ted Bundy tape simultaneously with their movie, or they buy the distributing rights before its release, like National Geographic did for Oscar-winning documentary Free Solo. Then you have private investors. Morgan Spurlock self-financed the documentary Super Size Me with only a budget of $65,000, but Jeffrey Skoll, founding president of eBay, funded the 2008 documentary Food Inc. with a budget of $1 million. After that, you have crowdfunding. These are your Kickstarters and student independent films, but there's not really that many famous examples, so we'll skip over it for now. The last category that I want to focus on today are grants. They've always kind of been elusive to me, and the word kind of has this stifled negative academic connotation, but it's essentially free money. So who has the means to provide this, and why? What's their incentive? There's hundreds of documentary grants out there, but here's just 4 of them to get a picture of how they work and how different they are. First is the ITVS, or the Independent Television Service. They operate under the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the same company responsible for NPR and PBS, and ITVS mainly distributes the PBS anyway, all publicly funded by government tax dollars. Their focus is to share the untold stories of America, which can be anything from a series about ethnic grocery stores across the nation to an Oscar-winning feature-length film about adolescent hardship and skateboarding culture. I watched both of them, or at least a trailer for the second, and it was a little cringy, but it's overall wholesome and nice. But you know who else loves making PBS documentaries? The Alfred P. Sloan Grant. Their goal is different. It's to raise public awareness about science and technology with engaging but still scientifically accurate stories. They funded PBS series on Leonardo da Vinci or poisoning and crime in New York City before forensic science was a thing, but they're not exclusively on PBS. They funded independent feature films, such as the documentary on Hedy Lamarr, which, by the way, was super cool, how the 1940s it-girl actress who was the inspiration for Snow White actually turned out to be a super cool inventor who created the backbone for modern-day Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. But they've even funded narrative films, such as The Imitation Game. So who is this Alfred P. Sloan? He was the long-standing president and CEO of General Motors, who took it from a disorganized car company to the world's largest industrial enterprise. In 1934, he invested $10 million, and adjusted for inflation today, that's about $240 million, into a charity endowment aimed at funding anything related to science, technology, and education, such as Wikipedia in 2008, or research grants to universities like MIT and Stanford. So they're pretty cool in my opinion. Documentaries are just one part of what they do. Scaling back down, the third grant we'll talk about is the Fonds National du Ciné, based in Quebec. Their focus, rather than just simply entertain, is to help independent documentarians born and living in the Global South to go against the tide and spur us into action. They're entirely donation-run and based on voluntary labor, so it's a much smaller scale, but it's really a work of love. The most successful documentary they funded is about Raimundo Glazer, an Argentinian journalist who made political documentaries about Cuba and communism and poverty in Brazil and the terrible factory working conditions in Argentina. But he disappeared in 1976, likely kidnapped and murdered by the state dictatorship of the time. So the story is told by the people surrounding him, and the documentary would go on to win 16 International Film Awards. The last example is the California Documentary Project Grant. They get funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities, but also a bunch of donations from foundations and corporations alike, so it's a mix of private and public funding. Out of the 4 grants we've talked about, they definitely have the most beautiful documentaries. All you have to do to qualify is tell a story about California, but I think it's the proximity to Hollywood which just raises the standard that much higher. Some examples include an economically declining salt mining village with a population of barely 1,000 in the middle of nowhere, to the forgotten 80s New Wave movement amongst the Vietnamese immigrants in Orange County. So yeah, these docs are just effortlessly cool. In short, the ITVS is for niche American subcultures, the Sloan Grant is for science, the Fonds National du Ciné is for international social change, and the California Documentary Project Grant is for artsy UCLA grads. As far as money, ITVS and Sloan give out by far the most, but usually through production houses and not directly to filmmakers. The Fonds National du Ciné and California Documentary Project Grant, on the other hand, give you less money, but much more creative freedom. So that's the world of documentary grants. I think it's super cool to have art funded in this way, where since it's essentially a donation, you don't need to make the money back. The work doesn't have to be successful, and you can just be totally experimental. And it's important in any field to have a diversity of funding. I mean, that's how the internet was formed. Not through private companies, but the US government funding research and military communications. That's the beauty of not needing a return on investment. Total innovation and trust in the long-term process. So thank God we have grants, and thanks for watching.